don't call me, don't talk to me. I want to start a new life. I want to see other people. I am seeing other people. I have other girlfriends now. But she's an obsessive compulsive person that calls, comes over, leaves notes, possible suicidal attempts, so forth and so on.
And how did that affect you?
Well, I acted as overly sympathetic to her, and so I kept going back to her, and then breaking up, going back, breaking up.
Okay. So that sounds like that got to be pretty tiring.
Yeah, very tiring. Especially when you're trying to start new relationships with the people, and then she's calling and coming over, and beating up my new girlfriends. She got violent too.
Huh.
Had a fight with one.
Well, thank you for sharing.
It's been hard for me to leave a relationship. I was married 13 years, and I felt like I had to get out of the relationship. And the only way that I could leave the relationship was to go for counseling to help me to be able to confront my partner, because I knew it would be very difficult to leave.
And was he cooperative in your leaving, or did it turn out to be as difficult as you expected it to be?
It was probably worse than I expected. It was very difficult because I just wanted time out to try to reflect on the relationship and to see if I wanted to remain in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to do that.
Okay. So you were really in pretty much an either-or choice at that point.
Right. And I had children, and he did not want me to take the children. So it's very difficult because I felt, for me personally, it was a question of whether I could survive. And the only way I could survive was to get out of the relationship, to assess the relationship. And so it meant I had to make the decision to leave my children there.
That's very difficult.
Very difficult.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. What was hard for you about that?
Well, you get into the routine to where it's like normal. It feels normal, and it's kind of a comfort zone, and to leave would be breaking that security or stability, whatever you want to call that. So you stay stuck in the routine. That's my experience.
And how do you get unstuck?
Hit a bottom. You come to where you just can't take it anymore, and then you're out.
And then once you're out, do you find that you're out, or do you tend to go back?
I try to stay out. I don't like to backtrack. I like to think of myself going forward.
Okay. Welcome back. Beth, I was touched by the level of sharing that my students were willing to provide. What kind of thoughts and feelings did you have as you were listening?
I was very moved by it and definitely identified with it both personally, and those are very common stories that I see in working with people with these issues. You know, I think one of the things that happens is that we start to look at the relationship as the alcoholic might look at their alcohol, or the drug addict might look at their drug, and so it becomes very hard if someone wants to leave to let go of that, because we depend so much on the ways in which the relationship helps us to manage our own painful feelings. So it's kind of like we begin to look at our partner like a drink with legs, you know, and this is not a good sign.
So even if I'm having pain in the relationship, at another level I'm not feeling. I mean, the advantage to staying is at least it's a familiar level of pain.
Exactly.
And I don't have to look at issues. Because people will say, what do you mean I'm not having my feelings when I'm feeling miserable,
right,
you know, all the time?
We get to look at feeling miserable within this relationship and think that if we could just change our partner, things would be better. And so we get to evade responsibility for changing ourselves that way, okay, which is often very painful to take a look at the things that we're doing.
So really looking at our part, our responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, what am I contributing here?
Yeah, and I think that's really the first step in recovery, is looking at your part in it, whether you're in a dysfunctional relationship or out of one and don't want to get into one again. I think that's really the first step, is to do a relationship inventory. And by that, you know, you just go back from the very beginning, your very first crush in elementary school or grammar school, on down to every relationship that you've been in, and take a look at what are the patterns, and what kind of person have I been attracted to, how did I get into the relationship, how did I get out of that relationship.
That's
And
right.
look at your patterns, and that way you can begin to see your part in it.
And, the other part of that is this belief, too, like, did I believe my partner when they said they were the way they were?
Right.
Because, a lot of times people will say, I knew when I went into this, or he said, or she said this was going to happen,
Right.
and somehow we think we're going to be different.
Right.
It's like, okay, so you cheated on your other 3 wives. I'm so wonderful that you would never want to do that,
That's right.
with me.
And I think that's really rooted in our childhood histories, that we get used to certain kinds of behaviors in our family, and we begin to learn how to nourish ourselves through fantasy. And as we become addicted to fantasy, it's very hard to see the realities of a relationship that's right in front of us. So we hear it at one level, but it doesn't have the meaning for us that it needs to have. Because we're so used to fantasizing that, if only,
Right.
Getting addicted to the potential of what this person could be,
That's
if only
exactly
they
right.
had the right person. Of course, I'm the right person, right?
Of course.
So-
What's not to love?
Right, right. And it's really not
Oh.
about us. That's
Yeah.
the point. If we're getting rejected in these relationships, it's really not about us.
It's kind of the roles we wind up
That's
picking
right.
and playing out over and over again.
And it's our own issues. We get to play out our own issues in these relationships, and that's what draws us so powerfully to it, because we try to resolve issues from our childhood in these relationships, and it's not the right place to resolve those issues.
It's just kind of like what I think of as matching pathology.
That's right.
That,
Yeah, the horns in his head fit the holes in mine,
That's right.
that kind of thing. So.
Well, now, I know you said that it gets better, and I believe it does. Give us some understanding about how we can do some recovery. for
Okay,
this.
well, as I mentioned, the first step is self-knowledge of your own patterns in these relationships. If you're in a relationship that's having a problem, sit down and talk with your partner and see if they're willing to take a look at these problems and maybe get some help, go in for counseling. If your partner isn't willing to go in with you, go in by yourself. There's a lot you can do on your own to help yourself in this relationship, or move out of it if that's what you need to do.
I was going to ask you, in terms of, going for yourself to talk about relationship issues, my experience with my clients is that there are times where that really will kind of bring the relationship to a head,
gonna
and there might
change
be a
things.
termination.
That's right.
And I think that's really an underlying fear for people, which is if I grow or I get better, it's going to cost me this person.
That's right. And so that's where working on your own issues of believing that things can be better is a real important piece of it. There's a risk involved. Whatever we do, if we stay in it, there's lots of risks involved in continuing the cycle of pain as well. And we pay a price, our partner pays a price, our children pay big prices
You
for these
bet.
kinds of intense, painful relationships. And I think the important thing is to know that it can get better. Doesn't always, if you go in for yourself, it doesn't always mean that the relationship's going to break up. I've had people bring their partners in eventually and be able to work on it too. So there's a lot of scenarios. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict it, and we think we can, oftentimes, and we often think the worst, and
That's
it's
right.
not true. It's not true.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency, if our self-esteem's low anyway, to
Right.
underestimate our importance to our partners.
That's right. Exactly. Especially if they're threatening to leave all
That's
the
right.
time. But if they're threatening to leave and they haven't left you, there's some power there in terms of what they want from you.
That's right.
And there's something that can be done to change that. So,
What's another one of the points in recovery we can look toward?
well, I think if you're in a situation where you're looking for a new relationship and you want things to be different, I think you have to get clear about what is the foundation of a healthy relationship. And we have a list of 5 C's of healthy relationships. And the first one is having common core values. Okay? So that means that you take the time to find out that you have a value system in common, that you, think the same kinds of things are important to you.
And I think a lot of times we spend energy in relationships trying to convince the other person
Right.
that our values are more important, instead of choosing somebody who's compatible to begin with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is where taking your time to get to know somebody is so valuable.
Okay.
And then the next one is looking for common interests. If my idea of fun is going on a camping trip with a tent out in the middle of the woods, and you want to, go shopping in the mall, and that's your idea of fun, this is not going to be very compatible,
No.
especially if I have a high need to spend time with you.
Okay.
So really being realistic about it doesn't mean you have to have all common interests, but enough that you can share things together.
And in fact, being able to work out a compromise. If you like the beach and I like to shop, we could go to Capitola. I could do the stores. You could sit out in the sand, and
Right.
we'll meet for lunch.
That's right.
Sometimes there's a third option instead of either
Right.
or.
There's a negotiation process in there, and I can't sit there and tell you how many common values and how many core interests you have to have in common in order for it to feel satisfying to you. That's really a very personal decision.
Okay.
The next one is having good communication. That's very important. How do you find out if someone has the same core values or similar core values, or if you
Right.
have things in common, if you're not communicating well? And a lot of times when we first meet somebody, we're putting on our best front.
You bet.
Right? And we're not always being as honest as maybe we like to think we are, And there's a lot of impression management going on. And so it takes time for that to drop away and to really find out who it is you're dealing with and what they really want to do.
Okay.
So good communication is very important.
So, and I think a lot of times if we have poor communication skills, what we'd like to do is find somebody who can communicate and teach us
Right.
instead of
Learning our
learning
own.
ourselves,
Right.
and then there begins to be a frustration in that cycle.
And that's kind of sad because communication skills are really fairly simple to teach and to learn, and that's something that you can learn with outside help
Yeah.
fairly easily. Haven't you
Okay.
found that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, people hear it from us, I think, a lot easier than they might hear it from their
Right,
partner
exactly.
who reads a book and comes home and says, you're supposed to use I messages.
Right.
That isn't always very helpful.
Right.
What's another one of our
Okay, the
5
next C
Cs?
is non-addictive caring.
Okay.
And so what that is involved with is having the ability to care but allow the other person to be their own self too, and an individual. So in the scenario you talked about going to the Capitola Mall and everything, you'd have to have non-addictive caring to allow your partner to go off and do their own thing and then come together again.
Okay.
Because the addictive caring, you're kind of attached at the hip.
That's right.
And it's very hard to allow your partner to be an individual and to have their own friends and their own interests. So, there's 3 important components to a healthy relationship: me, you, and us together.
That's right. What happens in the combination
Right.
of the two of us.
Right.
So, part of having something healthy means that I get to go outside, do my life, bring that into the relationship.
That's
Okay,
right.
what's the final and last one? We have about a minute.
Commitment.
Commitment. Ooh.
Commitment. And you notice that we put that last.
Of course, and quickly.
Last, okay? So you need to go through this rest of this checklist before you decide you're going to spend the rest of your life or even, move in or whatever.
Okay.
And a 6th one I'd like to add is courage.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot of courage to do this work, and all I can say to people out there that are in these kinds of situations is that it can change.
It does
And
change.
it does
changed
change.
for you.
It
It
changed
gets
for
better.
me. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Join us next week to answer the question, everyone tells me that I drink too much. How will I know when I've crossed that line? I'm Mary Crocker Cook, and this has been Bay Area Psychology. Good night.